just a little housekeeping. We will be taking questions tonight. So if you'd like to ask a question to our presenter, you can enter it in the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of your screen. We will be collecting those and then answering questions at the conclusion of Dr. Gleeson's presentation. Okay. So I'm Nancy Stetz, and I'm the Education Programs Manager here at Highland, and we are just so excited to have our program tonight with Dr. Maura Gleeson. Visitors are very often struck by a trio of portraits we have on display who represent a beloved teacher that the Monroe's older daughter had while in school in France, and then a brother and sister who are the stepchildren of Napoleon through his wife Josephine. And I think it really speaks to people, this friendship it takes, it's one that starts in the 1790s. They're friends for decades following. It's multi-generational, impacting James and Elizabeth Monroe, their daughter, Eliza, as well as their granddaughter, Hortensia. And I think Dr. Gleeson will show very, very well tonight, just how every picture tells a story in more than one way sometimes. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Maura Gleeson, our speaker. She is a visiting professor of humanities at Valencia College. Her research explores French art in the long 18th century with a particular interest in women's networks, patronage, and art making. The talk that Dr. Gleeson will give tonight is part of a larger project that seeks to uncover the far-reaching influence of Madame Jean-Louise Henriette Campan, whose portrait is also at Highland. So I, with great pleasure, turn you over to Dr. Maura Gleeson.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all of you. I would like to begin my presentation by extending a warm thanks to Dr. Sarah Bonharper, the director of James Monroe's Highland. She first welcomed me there in 2017 and was a thoughtful interlocutor during my visit. I also want to thank Nancy Stetz and Jason Woodall for their organization of the program and for providing photographs of the paintings, which you see on the screen here. Lastly, I would like to thank Mrs. Sharon Holton and Mr. Jack Wilmer for sharing with me information and documents from their collections of Monroe family objects. Their generosity with this material has enriched the talk that you are about to hear. In the mountains of Charlottesville, Virginia, down a mile-long road flanked with tall trees, stands James Monroe's Highland. On this site was a former plantation and the residence of President Monroe, his wife Elizabeth, and their daughters Eliza and Maria. Though the Monroe family lived there between 1799 and 1823, this land was purchased by Monroe in 1793, shortly before he and his family departed the United States for his new diplomatic position as minister to France. In an exhibit at the Highland hang 3 portraits that serve as evidence of a remarkable transatlantic friendship that blossomed during the Monroe's first extended stay in France. The subjects of these works are Madame Jean-Louise Henriette Campan, the director of the girls' school that James and Elizabeth sent their daughter Eliza to, Hortense Bonaparte, Napoleon's stepdaughter and the former Queen of Holland who attended school with Eliza Monroe, and Eugène de Beauharnais, Napoleon's stepson, the former Viceroy of Italy, and Hortense's brother. All 3 paintings are bust-length rectangular compositions with similar dimensions, although Madame Campan's is slightly larger. Early 20th century historians and familial inventories have noted that the works were a set of 3 gifted to Eliza Monroe's daughter, Hortensia Eugenia Monroe Hay, who was the goddaughter and namesake of Hortense and Eugène. They have also been attributed to François Gérard, the court portraitist for Napoleon. On the left, you are looking at an inventory notebook owned by Margaret Hodges, who inherited the paintings through her grandfather, Charles Wilmer. Wilmer describes the works as follows, quote, "The above portraits were painted by Francois Pascal Simon Gerard and were presented by Queen Hortense to Mrs. Hay, daughter of President James Monroe." In his book, The Life of James Monroe, historian George Morgan notes that the Campan portrait was, quote, "a life-sized oil painting executed on Napoleon's order by Baron Francois Pascal Gerard and presented to the Monroe family." The following talk uncovers new information about the patronage and authorship of the paintings. I will introduce you to the friendships between the Monroe family, Madame Campan, and the Bonaparte's Beauharnais families, which began in the 1790s and persisted through the 19th century. Our exploration of this network is crucial for understanding how the paintings made their way into the Monroe family's ownership. The archival, epistolary, and material evidence that follows will support my argument that these paintings were part of two separate commissions for the Monroe family. Moreover, that they were made by Julie du Vidal de Montferrier and Marie-Eleanor Godefroy, women artists who worked with Francois Gerard and built their own professional careers. The portrait of Madame Campan by Julie du Vidal was painted at the request of the First Lady, Elizabeth Courtwright Monroe. The portraits of Hortense and Eugène were commissioned by President Monroe's daughter, Eliza, and were intended as a gift for her daughter, Hortensia Eugenia. The patrons, sitters, and artists of these paintings were all part of an elite network of friendship cultivated by Madame Campan. They each benefited from the connections they made while in her orbit, and surviving letters show that Campan played an active role in facilitating both commissions. Although they were not originally intended as a set of three, that they are shown as such today is important. The paintings are physical evidence of a complex, international, and multi-generational web of women connected by friendship, education, and politics. To uncover these relationships is to reveal how and why women's networks mattered in the early 19th century. Before I lay out what is frankly a very complicated web that surrounds these paintings, let me first introduce you to the cast of characters that will populate this talk. We'll start with the patrons and recipients. As you know, James Monroe served as President of the United States between 1817 and 1825, but he held several diplomatic positions during his career. Elizabeth Courtwright Monroe, his wife, was a passionate musician and Francophile. In fact, James and Elizabeth were both Francophiles, known to have filled their homes with French furniture, instruments, books, and other materials. You can see several of these objects on display at the Highland. They had a son who died at 16 months and two daughters, Eliza Monroe, whose portrait you see on the screen, and Maria Hester Monroe, who was born in 1802. As you will learn later on in this paper, Eliza had a daughter in 1809, Hortensia Eugenia Monroe Hay. The sitters. On the left, you see Madame Campan. She grew up in Versailles, and her father was the chief of foreign affairs and the head of the King's Bureau of Interpreters under Louis XV. She was a lady in waiting to Queen Marie Antoinette, and after the Revolution, she opened a boarding school at Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which ran from 1794 to 1805. During the First Empire, she became the directress of Napoleon's Legion of Honor schools, and after being forced into retirement during the Bourbon Restoration, she wrote a series of educational treatises that became wildly popular in France, England, and the United States. At the center and on the right, you see Hortense and Eugène, brother and sister, the only two children of Josephine Bonaparte. Their father was Josephine's first husband, Alexandre de Beauharnais, an aristocrat who was guillotined during the French Revolution. Following Josephine's second marriage to Napoleon, they each became high-ranking political figures as part of their stepfather's empire. Hortense became the Queen of Holland and Eugène the Viceroy of Italy. During the Bourbon Restoration, both were exiled from France. Finally, the artists. At the center of the screen, you see Francois Gerard, the painter who has been historically associated with the works. He plays an important role in this paper as well. He began training as a history painter under Jacques-Louis David in 1786, but following the French Revolution, the most lucrative form of money-making for artists was in portraiture, which is how Gérard really made his name in Paris. He became the official court portraitist to the Bonaparte family and worked for them through the First Empire until Napoleon fell from power in 1814. During the Bourbon Restoration, he was named as the court portraitist for the restored monarchy. So at the time the Highland paintings were produced, he was working for King Louis XVIII. At the left and right side of the screen, you see Marie-Eleanor Godefroy and Julie Duvidal de Montferrier. Women artists' biographies are a little difficult to summarize. They've been historically shut out of the traditional spaces of art education, and their names are more frequently left out of the annals of art history, or otherwise lost because they changed them in marriage. Revisionist scholarship by Linda Nochlin, Anne Sutherland Harris, Jennifer Germain, and Monique Moulin has informed the biographies I'm about to read. Marie-Eleanor Godefroy came from a family of art dealers and restorers, but after her father's early death, she faced the need to financially support her family. She worked as a drawing teacher at Madame Campan school in Saint-Germain, and afterward moved to Paris to work with François Gérard. She began her career copying his paintings, and she was good friends with the Gérard family, even living with them for a time. In addition to producing work with him and for him, she also managed the correspondence for his studio. So although she's often described as an assistant or a copyist, she was more of a collaborator to François Gérard. Julie Duvidal is perhaps best known to us as Julie Hugo, as she married the brother of Victor Hugo, the famous author who wrote Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. She had her own lengthy career, however, as an artist. She was born in 1797 and was a student at Madame Campan's Legion of Honor School by 1806, when she would have been 9. Through Madame Campan, she found work as a governess to Bonaparte-affiliated families, while she built her career under Godefroy and Gérard. Although the paintings were commissioned in 1819, our story begins when my protagonists first met in the 1790s. The late 18th century had been an especially tumultuous period for the United States and for France. In 1776 and 1789, respectively, both countries underwent revolutions that shed their affiliations with absolutist monarchies and established nations built on declarations that championed freedom, equality, and Enlightenment virtues. In 1793 and 1794, a series of events took place that left the United States in a precarious position with its ally. Following the revolutionaries' executions of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, the French Republic declared war on Great Britain and requested aid from the United States in their mission. The United States claimed neutrality and thus faced the difficult task of balancing their relationships with France and Great Britain, both of whom sought aid from the Washington administration. These tensions boiled over with the Genet affair, in which a French ambassador, Edmond Genet, the younger brother of Madame Campan, by the way, encouraged citizens to rebel against the Washington administration until it acquiesced. It was this scandal that led to Monroe's appointment as minister to France, and the major objectives of his position were to strengthen the United States' friendship with the French Republic. In 1794, James, Elizabeth, and Eliza boarded the Cincinnatus and left Baltimore Harbor. They arrived in France a few days after the end of the Reign of Terror. As Monroe began his diplomatic position in a city still in tatters, Eliza was sent out of harm's way to a small boarding school just outside of Paris. The Institution Nationale de Saint-Germain-en-Laye had first opened in 1794 and was led by Madame Campan. Edmond Genet's eldest sister had garnered a reputation for herself by this time. Having been highly educated from a young age, Madame Campan and her sister had earned positions as ladies-in-waiting to Queen Marie Antoinette. As members of the Queen's inner circle, they faced terror when the French Revolution began. Madame Campan miraculously escaped her own execution because she had been denied her request to accompany the queen to prison. She wisely went into hiding between 1791 and 94, while her sister died by suicide to avoid the guillotine. Campan found herself needing to support her sick husband, her elderly mother, and 3 nieces who had come into her guardianship after her sister's death. She rented the former Hôtel de Rohan in Saint-Germain-en-Laye, a region that was, by this time, populated by royalist émigrés who had returned to France after the Revolution. For Madame Campan, the school was necessary for both her financial survival as well as to refashion herself from an ancien régime royalist to an educator who played an active role in civic life. Campan's first pupils were her 3 nieces and Hortense de Beauharnais, whom Eliza would have met when she entered the school shortly after. Between 1795 and 1796, more girls from prominent families enrolled, including Napoleon's sisters, Caroline and Pauline Bonaparte. Madame Campan's increasing enrollment was, in part, due to Hortense's mother, Josephine de Beauharnais. Like Campan, Josephine had enjoyed an aristocratic life in the Ancien Régime, but in 1794 she was left freshly widowed and reeling from her own imprisonment. Like many women in the post-revolutionary years, Josephine had had to rely on social connections to get by. As historian Sarah Horowitz has shown, the complete destruction of structured politics during the Revolution and Reign of Terror had nurtured a renewed faith in social friendships, and women played a key role in fostering these connections. After enrolling Hortense and Eugène at neighboring boarding schools, Josephine built a reputation as a famous Parisian socialite and had soon struck up a relationship with the military general Napoleon Bonaparte, who became her husband in 1796. Josephine's affiliation with Campan School was well known in Paris, and families seeking to garner favor with the Bonapartes, who were quickly rising to political fame by the late 1790s, enrolled their children there. A drawing by Victor Jean Nicole depicts the courtyard of Saint-Germain during a normal day in the academic year. At the center of his work is the entrance to what might have been the school's chapel. Nicole enlivened his composition with pencil drawings of young ladies in long white gowns who are scattered across the courtyard. Nicole's depiction of the pupils enjoying their hour-long recess offers insight into the daily structure at Saint-Germain that Hortense and Eliza would have experienced. Epistolary exchanges and surviving memoirs demonstrate that Madame Campan kept a strict schedule. A series of bells announced the times they woke, attended mass, classes, lunch, and other activities. Jennifer Popiel's work on girls' education in France has shown that rigorous structures were integrated into children's schooling in the 1790s to cultivate the virtues of self-control. These ideas were also reflected in their uniforms. Each pupil wore a white muslin dress with short capped sleeves. The dresses were belted with colored sashes to indicate their age level in the school, ultimately culminating in a multicolored one for the eldest students. On the screen are 2 miniature portraits of Hortense and Eliza as pupils at Campan School. They were 3 years apart in age, and on the right you can see that Hortense wears a white sash while Eliza at the left wears a red one. The British novelist Frances Burney visited Saint-Germain in 1803 and noted that Campan students wore these dresses to, quote, discourage vanity and competition. It is interesting to note, though, that the dresses align with the French vogue for Athenian fashion that reached its peak in the 1790s. Thanks to a cultural obsession with neoclassical imagery during the Revolution, simple white dresses, known as dresses à la grecque, populated fashion plates and portraits at the time. Studies of post-revolutionary fashion by Susan Siegfried and Claire Cage have shown that the simple designs and loose, thin material of the dresses visually associated their wearers with beauty, purity, and timelessness. They were especially popular on the Parisian social scene, worn both by Hortense's mother, Josephine, as well as Eliza's mother, Elizabeth, who by 1795 had earned the nickname La Belle Américaine, which is how she was known in Paris. Madame Campan would have been aware of its popularity in contemporary fashion, but in the context of her school, the girls' dresses made each student an equal. Foundational work by Rebecca Rogers, Catherine Montfort, and Terry Quintana has shown that while her prospectus for Saint-Germain had claimed to offer a domestic education, Madame Campan's curriculum covertly established a rigorous suite of academic subjects for her students. She taught them to read and write in French and English, and also hired an illustrious roster of artists and musicians that allowed her students to cultivate near professional levels of skills. Many of her teachers were former academicians struggling for work after the Revolution. Instructors of the visual arts included Marie-Eleanor Godefroy and Madame de Balzac for drawing, and Jean-Baptiste Isabey and Louis-François Aubry for painting. Campan encouraged her students to reason and seek intellectual excellence. Her 1826 treatise on education encouraged emulation as a driving force among her students. Emulation is a social and pedagogical structure in which students competed to equal or surpass someone in merit of knowledge. This practice had traditionally permeated male-dominated academies of learning and encouraged networks between teachers and pupils that led to future opportunities in the professional sphere. The culture of emulation at Saint-Germain created a familial atmosphere that allowed for positive reinforcement in academic subjects and personal comportment. In a 1795 progress report to the Monroes, Madame Campan explains emulation in a classroom context. Quote, "Eliza is marvelously well. She has formed a great friendship with a new little boarder who is here and who reads at the same time with her. I have promised a beautiful bonbonniere in a month to the one who reads fluently. This will bring forth, I hope, some emulation, for this unfortunate reading comes very hard to us." The bonbonniere, a small candy box, was one of many incentives Campan offered her high-achieving pupils. The most coveted prize at Saint-Germain, though, was the Good Conduct Award, whose recipient was voted on by their peers. The prize for it was a ceramic rose awarded to one pupil at Madame Campan's end-of-year exams, which took place in front of the students' parents and other invited distinguished guests. In 1795, Hortense was the winner of this prize. Louis-François Aubry's miniature portrait of Hortense, which is also at the Highland, prominently depicts the Good Conduct Rose tucked neatly into her curly blonde hair. At the time he made this work, Aubry was a teacher at Saint-Germain, and the recipient of this portrait was Eliza Monroe. The 12-year-old Mademoiselle Beauharnais smiles out of the small gold frame at her friend, perhaps encouraging Eliza to emulate her behavior and achieve her own Good Conduct Rose. The groundbreaking curriculum and integration of political families at Saint-Germain bolstered Campan's celebrity as an elite educator. This was highlighted in her portrait by Jean-Baptiste Isabey, which was submitted to the Salon of 1799. Isabey, who was a painting teacher at Saint-Germain, depicts Campan seated on a stone bench in a courtyard, having taken pause from her reading to address a young pupil, Isabey's daughter, Alexandrine. To the Salon viewer who knew of Madame Campan's school, the courtyard setting was recognizable as a space for social and political events, including an annual celebration of Bastille Day, in which her students showcased their knowledge and talents for the visiting public. This event was attended by the Monroes, as well as by Josephine and her socialite friends. Artists from the Academy, including François Gérard and Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, attended the celebrations and served as judges for the students' exams. Madame Campan designed the campus as a microcosm for her future vision of society and women's place in it. The Saint-Germain School reflects what Cassandra Good has described as the vital role that educated white women played in the new French and American republics. Although denied direct participation in the political system, women played a crucial part in the formation of it, and their friendships were necessary for survival. Campan not only ensured that her students receive a proper education, but she also managed to build herself a network of relationships with her former teachers and students. By the early 19th century, my protagonists had gone their separate ways, but the bonds they built through Saint-Germain proved to be useful in several instances. The Monroe family returned to the United States in 1796, where James Monroe served as governor of Virginia and then as ambassador to the United Kingdom. In 1803, the family returned to France as part of James Monroe's mission to secure the Louisiana Purchase. By that time, Napoleon Bonaparte had risen to power as first consul and was poised to be crowned emperor, which he would be in 1804. Monroe was tasked with convincing Napoleon and his finance ministers to secede their territory, and was certainly aware of the powerful opportunity he had thanks to his daughter's childhood friendship. In his autobiography, Monroe credits Eliza's friendship with the Beauharnais family as beneficial to his diplomatic tasks. Quote, "So far as Hortense and Josephine had the mind of the first consul Napoleon, it was exerted to produce a favorable feeling towards me, my family, my country." Eliza, who by this time was 16, had accompanied her parents and re-enrolled at Madame Campan's school, where she was encouraged in a letter from her parents to progress in her work and, quote, "merit the perfect approbation of Madame Campan." It seems that Eliza's preferred subject was music, because later in the same letter, James Monroe promised to buy her a harp. Patricia Norwood's exploration of the Monroe family's relationship to music reveals that Elizabeth, Eliza, and Maria were all skilled musicians and owned several instruments. While Eliza continued her studies at Saint-Germain, Hortense had entered a very different phase of her life. Napoleon had adopted her and Eugène as his children, and she became part of the emperor's strategic plan to conquer Europe by marrying his sisters and daughter to men in high-ranking positions. Hortense was forced to leave Saint-Germain in 1802 to marry Louis Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother. Their arranged marriage was an extremely unhappy period of her life, and Hortense's memoirs describes enduring Louis's controlling temper and fits of jealousy. She nevertheless embraced her title and position at the Bonaparte court, and shortly after her marriage gave birth to her first son, Napoleon Charles Bonaparte. This joyous moment, however, soon after soured. Napoleon and Josephine had unsuccessfully tried to conceive a child for several years, and in a desperate attempt to ensure a male heir, Napoleon required that Hortense and Louis allow him to adopt their son. Hortense describes this as a frightening moment in her memoir, noting that Josephine instantly burst into tears, and Louis angrily questioned why he, as the emperor's brother, would not be fit to assume the throne. Napoleon replied that he would, quote, "write a law that gives me authority over my family." And in May 1804, he indeed added an article on adoptions to his civil code. Despite the tears, tantrums, and arguments that took place behind closed doors, the Bonapartes' public displays of power and fashionable elegance were captured in paint by their portraitist, François Gérard. On the screen, you're looking at portraits by him of Napoleon and Josephine, dressed in the robes they wore to the coronation ceremony, which took place in Notre Dame on December 2nd, 1804. Gérard's portraits typically served as diplomatic gifts. They were sent to other countries and hung in official Bonaparte residences across Europe. Gérard made official portraits of Hortense and Eugène, who by this time were high-profile members of the court. The portrait of Eugène on the left is the study for a now lost portrait and depicts him as Imperial Highness the Viceroy of Italy. Gérard's portrait of Hortense and her son was intended as a pendant to that of her husband, which you see here. Both were commissioned for Napoleon's residence at Fontainebleau. As an official portrait, the work is a little stiffer and more staged than other portraits of Hortense. I bring in for comparison this 1812 study for another portrait by Marie-Eleanor Godefroy. She portrays Hortense in her private apartments, leaning against a chair and holding her eldest son's hand. Familial intimacy is prevalent in the connection between mother and children, as well as in the brothers' embraces. Hortense's engagement with the arts is also emphasized by the drawing scrolls and portfolio on the chair next to her, in addition to the book in her right hand. Despite the tumultuous nature of her rocky marriage and the expectations of courtly life, Hortense found comfort in art making and collecting. She maintained an epistolary connection with Madame Campan, who urged her to, quote, resist the dangerous whirlpool of court life and structure her days around art making. Between 1802 and 1807, when she was crowned Queen of Holland, Hortense took classes with Francois Gérard and other artists. Although the Academy and its life drawing classes were primarily reserved for men, with few exceptions, revisionist scholars have demonstrated that many women amateur artists socially engaged with professionals and took classes in academic studios at the Louvre. Hortense's memoir recalls her early years of art making at the Bonaparte court. Quote, all of my days were occupied by my children and by painting. I copied at that time my painting in oil by Gérard. On the screen, you're looking at a selection of portraits from this period in her life. On the left is Francois Gérard's portrait of Hortense, and at the center and right are paintings that are attributed to Francois Gérard. However, my doctoral dissertation proposed that the center painting is in fact a self-portrait by Hortense, and I am currently working to reattribute the work on the right as a self-portrait too. That work recently sold at an auction. As Hortense ranked ever higher in the Bonaparte court, Madame Campan facilitated connections between she and Godefroy, who by 1805 had started working in Gérard's studio. In 1807, the newly crowned queen received a letter from Madame Campan that encouraged her to, quote, do good for her former teacher by commissioning Godefroy to make copies of Gérard's portraits that she could give to others as gifts. Indeed, many extant portraits of similar compositions were given as gifts to Hortense's friends. They are mentioned in inventories and letters and included in other works of art. Although it is common to see Gérard's name attached to these works, and he certainly did have a professional relationship to Hortense, Campan's 1807 letter leads me to believe that many of them were actually by Godefroy. In Napoleonic France, Madame Campan also experienced a change in her career. At the urging of Hortense and Josephine, Napoleon named her his directress of his schools of the Legion of Honor, which aimed to educate all girls of France. She closed Saint-Germain in 1805 and opened her first Legion of Honor school at the Château d'Écouen in 1806. The Écouen school, like Saint-Germain, publicly embraced a domestic education while continuing to teach ambitious subjects. It was here that Julie de Vidal enrolled as a student of Madame Campan's and thus entered her inner circle. On the screen, you're looking at a painting by Elizabeth Swaggers, who was one of the painting teachers at Écouen. She depicts the chateau right at the center of the screen, and you can see the students at the Écouen school kind of filing into the courtyard because Queen Hortense had visited the campus that day. As the directress of the Legion of Honor schools, Madame Campan continued to cultivate her network. After having offered Godefroy a position as painting teacher at the school and being turned down, she instead hired her to paint her official portrait. The teacher wears an austere black velvet gown and feathered cap. Small curls peep out from the enormous white plume that covers her head. The painting highlights Campan's familial pedagogy by depicting the teacher in a loving embrace with her young student. Godefroy's work is an updated version of Isabey's 1799 portrait, in that both represent Campan as a fashionable Frenchwoman and caring instructor. On the nearby table is a portrait bust of Hortense, which gazes out of the window toward the background of the work. Hortense had advocated on Campan's behalf for the position as directress of the Legion of Honor schools, and in 1809, Hortense was named the Princess Protectress of its institutions. Godefroy gives primacy to the female relationships that stemmed from Madame Campan's tutelage. This is a portrait of a female teacher by one of her female teachers and includes her female students. As Hortense and Campan adjusted to life in Empire France, the Monroe family stayed on good terms with them. By this time, they were living at Highland and steadily advancing in United States politics. James Monroe finished his position as minister to the United Kingdom in 1807. He led an unsuccessful presidential campaign in 1808 and became the governor of Virginia in 1811. Eliza Monroe had married her husband, George Hay, in 1808, and in 1809, she gave birth to her daughter, Hortensia Eugenia. With Napoleon's exile in 1814 and the ushering in of the Bourbon Restoration, the Monroe's French friends began to experience new waves of hardship. The newly restored monarchs sought a return to the old regimes of pre-revolutionary France. The new king, Louis XVIII, aimed to consolidate his rule by passing a series of strict censorship laws that aimed to erase all printed and painted evidence of revolutionary or Bonapartist support. He closed the Legion of Honor schools, forcing Madame Campan to permanently retire in Mantes. Hortense, Eugène, and the rest of Napoleon's family were exiled from France. François Gérard remained in Paris and found his footing by adjusting his work to the Bourbon taste. On the screen here, you can see his coronation portrait of the restored King Louis XVIII, who named Gérard his court painter in 1815. In 1816, Madame Campan wrote to James Monroe, who by this time was the Secretary of State under James Madison and was also running for president. He would be elected the following year. Campan wrote that she had recently experienced, quote, misfortunes of the revolution enacted by the Bourbons. The final page of the letter offers her, quote, tender respects and compliments to Madame Monroe and my dear Eliza. It appears that the Restoration initiated a higher rate of exchange in letters between Madame Campan and the Monroes, and it is this connection that I believe led to the 3 paintings at Highland. Madame Campan's portrait was commissioned for James and Elizabeth's personal collection, while the portraits of Hortense and Eugène were intended for Eliza's daughter. Letters between Madame Campan and Hortense give us insight into the commissions. In February 1819, a lengthy letter from Madame Campan references them. Quote, I will tell you, madam, that the amiable Madame Monroe and her daughter have written to me by way of the consul to the United States in Paris that they wanted to have my portrait in Washington and that the American consul had the order to have it made. Mademoiselle Duvidal, whose talent, under the eyes of Mademoiselle Godefroy and also Gérard, has already reached a degree that has merited her precious approval. She made a very good bust-length portrait of your teacher, but she has kept the original. If you wish, I will order you one. Julie Duvidal, former student of Écouen, lives and makes her own living by her talent. She sold it for 200 francs, including frame, to Madame Monroe. I would like to give you the tribute, but your kindness for me compels me not to dare. Would you like one of these portraits? It will be made under Gérard's eyes. Duvidal's portrait of Madame Campan is an intimate depiction of the headmistress as she would have appeared in 1819. She is shown as a matronly woman, she was 67 at the time, wearing a lace bonnet with a silk bow that frames the curls surrounding her face. Her brown housecoat is fur-trimmed, and an embroidered shawl is draped around her left shoulder. As Campan noted in the letter, Elizabeth Monroe paid 200 francs for the work, and it was a copy of an already existing portrait by Duvidal. Campan's letter offered to commission a third copy of it for Hortense, which was confirmed in a later letter. To be clear, 3 known portraits of Madame Campan by Julie Duvidal were made in 1819. The original in Duvidal's possession, the Monroe painting, and the copy that Campan gifted to Hortense, which has since been lost. Another letter from June 1819 includes a long excerpt from Eliza. Quote, I recently received for the second time the most touching proof of affection from Eliza Monroe, her father, her mother. Here, madam, is what concerns you in the letter. And what I'm about to read is from Eliza, which Madame Campan copied into her letter to Hortense. Quote, I have never been so preoccupied with thoughts of my old, Quote, I have never been so preoccupied with thoughts of my old classmates as since they had suffered the most terrible setbacks. Tell this, please, to the dear and kind Hortense and to the poor Aigle. But first let them know that 9 years ago I gave birth to a little girl, fortunately much prettier than me because she has the complexion, the eyes, and the features of my mother. Tell them that, according to our civil and religious customs, the highest respect we could do is have the child baptized. And at that time, my mother and father presented the child as proxies for my dear friend Hortense and her respected brother Eugène, of which the child carries their names. At that time, we sent Mr. Morris, in charge of dispatches from our government, to send our respects to Hortense and Eugène to make it known what our hearts had called us to do. We did not receive a response. My daughter often talks about her godparents, and I would like to ask each of them for a copy of their portraits that will belong to the child. The times have changed, my affections have not. Friendship should not feel what has passed, and forever these two portraits will honor my daughter and be the most beautiful ornaments in her room. The letter continues and ends with Madame Campan's offer to organize the portraits and have them sent through the consul to the United States. She indicates that she has already sent hers to Madame Monroe and also notes that Eliza specifically requested them to be oil paintings. Although the artist behind these works is not named in their letters, there are several reasons why I believe they were made by Marie-Eleanor Godefroy. By this time, François Gérard was the court painter to the Bourbon King Louis XVIII. It is unlikely he would have jeopardized his public position to paint portraits for his former Bonaparte associates. Moreover, Godefroy was linked to Campan, Hortense, and Eliza through her position as drawing teacher at Saint-Germain-en-Laye. On the advice of Madame Campan, Hortense had already worked with Godefroy to commission copies of her portraits during the First Empire. The 1819 work is strikingly similar to the copies in their bust-length compositions and the seated pose of the Queen. Two key differences between them are that the 1819 painting has a dark background with no drapery or landscape, and the sitter faces in a different direction. The most compelling evidence of Godefroy's authorship is that the portrait is a cropped version of her full-length portrait of the Queen and her sons. She submitted this work to the Salon of 1812 and won a medal for it. Her midnight blue velvet gown with its cinched tulle sleeves is an unmistakable match in both portraits. Moreover, the simple background of the 1819 painting aligns with the wall in Godefroy's full-length work. Although she won a medal for it, Salon critics frequently alleged that Gérard touched up her paintings. A writer for the Mercure de France even noticed that the painting was mistaken as, quote, a production of Monsieur Gérard himself. Godefroy resented these comparisons, and Salon criticism of her portrait is valuable for understanding the context of the 1819 work. That it was a copy of Godefroy's own original composition and not Gérard's is a demonstration of the artist's self-promotion. Its presence in the collection of an elite American family would have been a noteworthy achievement in her career. The portrait of Eugène has been a little more difficult to track down, and my work on this is still unfolding. Godefroy's portrait is strikingly similar to two other works that date to the 1830s, and it is possible that she adapted it from a now lost full-length portrait. Even so, Godefroy had already made a copy of Eugène's and Hortense's portraits for Madame Campan in 1806, which is evidenced by another letter between the two. That Godefroy produced portraits of the same sitters to hang together in Madame Campan's home, and that she was Eliza's former drawing teacher increases the likelihood that she would also produce these paintings for Eliza's daughter. In 1823, Hortense wrote to Eliza following the death of Madame Campan and references the portraits. Quote, "You ought to have received through Madame Campan our portraits for your daughter, although I have never received a letter from you on this subject. I keep this right over her, which you have given me, and send you a little chain of the country where I live, and which I pray you make her wear as a souvenir of me." The language of these letters evokes a sentimental friendship that linked the painted sitter with her goddaughter, Hortensia. Moreover, Hortense notes that Eliza received the portraits through Madame Campan, once again acknowledging the teacher's active hand in facilitating this exchange. The choice of Duvidal and Godefroy to paint the portraits could only be understood by those who had experienced their early years of girlhood side by side. These affirmations of friendship are important given the rocky Franco-American politics of the time. By 1819, Eliza's father, James Monroe, was the president of the United States. The nation was wary of Bonapartist politics, which they considered to have abandoned the Republican values of democracy. Following Napoleon's abdication in 1814, many Bonapartists fled to the United States, but James Monroe had barred Napoleon from entering the country. Even with this in mind, the women's insistence that the changing times had not affected their friendship suggests something of the durability of elite women's networks at the time, which had little difficulty maintaining ties across the political spectrum. Eliza certainly never retracted allegiance to her network of friends in France. Following the deaths of her husband and mother in 1830, she moved to Paris to live out the rest of her days and is buried in Père Lachaise Cemetery. In 1852, Hortense's son rose to power in France as Emperor Napoleon III, attempting to create his own Second Empire. 10 years later, his chief of staff, Jean-François Mocard, wrote to Eliza's granddaughters. Mocard's letter opens by acknowledging the tender friendship between Eliza and Hortense, and later notes that Napoleon III intended to send a legacy left for Hortensia in her godmother's will. The reference to Eliza's and Hortense's friendship signals the ripple effect of a network still felt decades later. That the paintings have never left the Monroe family demonstrates their effect on subsequent generations of descendants. In 2017, I had the pleasure to speak with Mrs. Sharon Holton, who provided many important details about the work's journeys through her family in the 19th and 20th centuries. During our phone call, Mrs. Holton said of the paintings, quote, "These portraits mean something to the world, and we are tasked with protecting these memories." In an exhibit at the Highland, then, are 3 paintings that serve as a memory of a rich friendship that flourished over several decades. Although they have long been attributed to François Gérard, it is important to reattribute the works to Julie Duvidal and Marie-Eleanor Godefroy. Not only do their original compositions deserve due credit, but the circumstances behind the exchange of portraits uncovers a web of women's networks that stemmed from the 1790s. Although they weren't originally intended as a set of 3, that they are shown as such today is important because they offer us valuable insight into a complex network of women patrons, artists, and friends. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maura. That was just, I was riveted. Having been here now for almost 8 years and looked at those paintings, I have learned so much from your presentation tonight. And I welcome anyone who has got questions to enter them into the Q&A. And I will take the liberty of asking the first question, which is, I'm curious. I really enjoyed seeing all the clothing, in the different portraits you showed us. Are there any surviving, pieces of clothing today from any of this, from, Madame Campan or Hortense or Eugène that you're aware of or that you've been able to see in your studies?
The physical objects in person.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen several pairs of shoes, funnily enough, at Josephine's own home at Malmaison, just outside of Paris. They are frighteningly thin, or not thin, but narrow shoes. I can't imagine the kind of pain it would take to sort of wear these beautifully delicate little flats. But what I find so striking about clothing, and I think your question kind of opens me up to thinking about the broader kind of sartorial aspects of the paintings too. Something that I didn't get the chance to expand on in this particular talk is that lovely blue velvet dress that Hortense is wearing in her 1819 portrait. And that's a really significant choice actually for 1819. You know, I've looked at so many Bonaparte portraits, and it's really rare to see an outfit repeated across several years. So Hortense wears this blue dress in the 1891 work, and she tends to choose this, you know, for a couple of different other works. In 1812, she wore the dress in Godefroy's portrait, but she also wore it in another high-profile public painting of Napoleon kind of founding an orphanage for his Legion of Honor schools. So she tends to wear this blue dress in works that are associated with motherhood, especially thinking about the connections in art history to the kind of purity and piety that a blue dress can evoke, especially, you know, along the lines of the Virgin Mary. So Hortense, as this person who studied art history, would have known the meaning behind her clothing. So the choice of a blue dress for the 1819 work in particular was absolutely deliberate.
We have a question from the audience who would like to know, who would the copies of Hortense's paintings by Godefroy that were mentioned have been gifted to?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. So there are a couple different levels of gifts that Hortense, as a kind of public woman at the Bonaparte court, would have gifted. I, of course, introduced you to François Gérard's kind of full-length portrait of her as queen. Those were kind of public diplomatic gifts sent to various countries. The smaller paintings, though, for instance, the works that I mentioned that Godefroy made the copies of, that show up in all these inventories, are kind of private, sentimental gifts of friendship. So they are quite frequently given to former students of Madame Campan's. In the presentation, I included a self-portrait by one of Madame Campan's former students who would have been friends with Hortense and Eliza, and she had that portrait hanging up in her study. So a lot of Madame Campan's former students and kind of loving friends in her inner circle would have received them.
And kind of dovetailing off of that similar question, we have another question asking, so in those days were portraits copied and sent as gifts, would this have been part of the training of women at the time to promote their artistic developments? So I guess the copying of paintings.
Yes, that is absolutely part of the sort of training. It also allows for women to develop these networks that allow them to advance their careers. So working as a copyist and as an assistant to an academician or to another, you know, professional artist is absolutely a form of training. And network building and all those other kinds of ways that a woman builds her career as an artist.
We have time for one more question if anyone would like to pose an extra one.
Oh, hi, Mrs. Holton. I see you in the chat. Thank you. I guess if we just have one more minute, I would like to kind of say it's been such a pleasure to work on these three paintings. Of course, as a historian of French art, I've spent a lot of time looking at these works from the perspective of Madame Campan and of Hortense from the sort of French perspective. But something I'm really eager to expand on in the future is Elizabeth and Eliza's perspectives as well. I mean, their lives are so fascinating. I've been working on these for a while, and I was so amazed to find that Elizabeth and James, during their period in France, they worked to, for instance, get the Lafayettes out of prison when they were in prison during the Revolution. I think that they've got such an interesting, fascinating political history. So that's sort of the next steps of this project.
Something else I was wondering, Dr. Gleeson, is the site where Eliza actually attended Madame Campan's school, like as a young girl. What is there? What is in that spot today? Is there any vestige left from it, or?
The building's actually being remodeled as apartments. So you can see the facade of the original building. And I believe, so I haven't been able to walk into them, of course, because they're private apartments, but right in the foyer, in the entryway where residents today would probably get their mail or something, there is like a water fountain, kind of a trough that the students would have sort of filed in. Madame Campan, funnily enough, according to memoirs of her students, had a portrait of Marie Antoinette hung in the entryway of her school right next to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. So she's always kind of on that edge of embracing what the revolution did, but also maintaining her royalist ties.
And we have one more question we can slide in. Was Madame Campan's school and the community it created unique, or are there similar examples?
It's a really great question. What the French Revolution did, and the Enlightenment more broadly did, was completely change children's education in particular. I would like to argue that Madame Campan's school is unique for the 1790s. She was able to quite quickly garner such an elite network of political families. So it's not unique in terms of implementing Enlightenment education, but it is in that it took the emulation aspect of her educational pedagogy, and it also just prepared young students for this new role as women who had to build themselves a kind of normative domestic life while also encouraging them to reach a little bit further into their intellectual capacities. I'm kind of missing some of my words there. I would say it's absolutely unique for the 1790s. And that's shown in being named the directress of the Schools of Legion of Honor. She wrote the entire curriculum for the French public schools of the early 19th century. And it's no coincidence that the numbers of professional women artists and novelists kind of skyrocket upward at the early part of the 19th century. I would like to argue that Madame Campan had a very direct role in that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gleeson, for all your research, for your time tonight. It was such a pleasure to have you as our presenter. Thank you all in the audience for attending. We're delighted to have you at this program, and I encourage anyone to visit highland.org for more information about James Monroe's Highland. So thank you to all, and have a good evening.